And here we go with a friendly conversation about science and God. And I'm pretty excited. We got Lucas here with me. And I don't want to call myself a science nerd because I feel like comparing myself to you would be kind of ridiculous. But um, I'm an avid supporter of science. So I am really intrigued. I want to know how you got to God from science. And my mind is open. Hopefully we'll get there. But um, tell me about yourself.
Yeah. So, where do I start? Background, undergraduate degrees in physics and astrophysics. That was my passion growing up. And when I say my passion growing up, I mean going all the way back to when I was 5. I remember 5th grade. I remembered borrowing a physics textbook from my classroom, and borrowing without permission, more or less. And the teacher let me keep it, and I just fell in love. When I was 15, I took an astronomy class in my high school, and we watched the universe, learned about all the planets, galaxies. I fell in love with it even more, to the point where the next year I took a series of weekend seminars at Fermilab.
Okay.
I don't know if you're familiar with Fermilab.
I am not.
It's a Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory. So before CERN, it was the largest particle accelerator facility.
Ooh, okay.
So that was my high school life. I went into college knowing, okay, I was going to study physics. I was going to end up getting, my plan was to get a PhD in physics and be a professional physicist. And that was sort of the goal.
Okay.
Well, I went to college, went to study physics, and after 3 years, I ended up graduating with my degrees in physics and astrophysics. The problem at that point was I got very fed up with the physics curriculum, the approach of just shut up and calculate. There's a really good book. It's called What is Real by Adam Becker that talks largely about 20th century physics. And the back half of that, this mentality in the universities was pretty much just all you do is you just do calculations. You don't really ask what was the meaning behind any of it. So that was what ultimately got me interested in the first place was, well, what is real? What is all this that I'm looking at? When I look at the universe, what does it all mean? So as I continued in my own studies, I started working and just continued on reading books and ended up pursuing a master's degree in science and religion. So that was the degree title. It's a Master of Arts in Science and Religion. Now, I'm sure many of your audience would probably be interested in knowing a little bit about what that degree looks like.
I absolutely do want to know what that is.
And you actually have a picture of kind of what that looks like. You have a picture of me standing next to that stack of books.
Yes.
But effectively, it's sort of this cross. It's a lot of history and philosophy of science mixed with some theology. That's basically what the program looked like. And it was really this adding in that history and philosophy of science that kind of rounded out my background in the hard sciences directly, because that's what I was missing. The piece of actually, how do I contextualize? Yeah, I know all this data. I can understand, wrote a bunch of code, studied, took a particle physics class, and I could run code and say, the energy spike here means I'm talking about this particle, but what are the deeper questions behind that? And so that's ultimately what got me interested in this whole, science and faith. I was a Christian in college.
And have you been a Christian your whole life?
I remember when I was 14 was when I finally made that decision. So I was just about to head into high school. But naturally, I got into a lot of conversations while I was in college about, science and faith. And that helped me sort of shape, the reasoning why I like science in the first place. Science was getting me towards truth. And if I wanted to have a faith along with science, they both needed to be in line with truth. So I needed to end up seeking truth as ultimately my main goal. So that's kind of what set me on the trajectory I've been on for the past 7 or 8 years, whatever it's been.
So I'd like to consider myself a seeker of the truth as well. So
Mhm.
I am, you're a man of significant knowledge. I am, could you give me an example of something of how science got you to believe in God? Or this could be a loaded question, but proves God exists. I don't know if you want to go that far, but help me get from where I'm at over here to understanding how you got to God.
Yeah, so I would never really use the term or the phrase using science to prove God exists or prove God in that sense.
Okay.
Largely because God is outside of the scope of scientific investigation. There are certain types of...
Wait. Did I just win then? Is the conversation over? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. Sorry.
Yeah. So science only gets you to certain types of truth, certain knowledge claims you can know through science, but the vast majority of things we know, we don't know through science. Science is limited in scope. It's really a set of methods that we use to investigate the observable phenomena that we see. Okay. But most of what we know is not based on employing those methods. So when it comes to how science relates to God, it's sort of a two-step process. We need to understand what science is and how science works. Okay. And then we need to understand, okay, take a step back and look at it at maybe a higher order. And what does that say about the greater nature of reality? Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely.
So I want to sort of get on an understanding of science here. When we talk about science, I'm going to use a general term of, let's say, science is a process, right? Okay. It's a process by which we observe the external world, and then we reason to true conclusions about the external world. Okay. Would you agree with that? Disagree? Want to change anything?
Can you just, sorry, for clarity, could you repeat that one more time?
Yeah. So science is a process by which we observe the external world and reason to true conclusions about the external world.
And just for clarification, by external world, you're not referring to anything supernatural at this part.
Oh, no. The world outside of yourself.
Then yes. Okay, I would agree with you.
Yeah. So one of the aspects, there's the word truth in there, right? So I believe that when we do science, we're actually at least approaching a true description of reality. Okay. So it's not, there are some positions in the philosophy of science that would be more like instrumentalist positions, that they're kind of just saying, well, science is a tool, we use it to sort of speak coherently, but they don't claim to be making any realism claims about the universe. Okay. It's sort of an anti-realist position. And I say, by and large, when we engage in science, we are hitting upon a true description of reality. Okay. And so I would argue that I'll call that having a high view of science, if you will.
What do you mean by a high view of science?
So I was having a low view of science, which says science isn't really truth-seeking. It's just sort of looking for consistency or more, I would say, practicality, if you will, utility. But you don't actually claim to be uncovering truths about reality. Okay.
So I agree so far. Do you want to move forward with how any of this would get you to a God?
Yeah. So I just want to make sure you didn't have any pushback on that.
No. Sorry. We're in agreement.
Okay. Cool. So in order for science to operate, right? In order for science to be a thing, right? This high view of science, there needs to be a couple of things that are actually true about the universe in which we live. Okay. For the purposes of this conversation, I'll narrow it down to two. One is the universe itself needs to be intelligible.
What do you mean by that?
In principle, we ought to be able to we ought to be able to discern truths about the universe. It is in principle understandable. I guess a story about this: when I was in college, one of my classmates was really struggling with the subject matter, and we were in a discussion section, and he sort of complained to the teaching assistant and said, you know, I just don't understand, why is the universe so hard to understand? And the TA kind of looked at him and said, really, the astonishing fact is that we can understand the universe. There's no reason to think that this universe should be understandable.
Okay.
Right. The universe itself has to operate. It has to have a certain structure. It has to operate under certain laws in order for science to actually work.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I'm with you so far.
Okay. So the second part that's necessary for science to work is the universe needs to contain intelligent creatures. And by intelligent creatures, I mean creatures that can engage in a legitimate process of deliberation. So the ability to actually go through that reasoning process from observations to a conclusion.
Just so I'm clear, you're saying the only reason to science is possible. The application of science is only possible through, intelligible beings, but science itself as an overall, it's either reliable or it's not, regardless. Is that correct?
So right. So say you had a universe that was structured and ordered,
okay.
But you didn't have any intelligent creatures. What we know as science would be like a theoretical sense. Yeah, if there were intelligent creatures, then you could do science. But if there were no intelligent creatures, there would be nobody to engage in science in the first place. So if the universe was nothing but, a single electron, for example, there would be a structure, but the science, the discipline of science, the enterprise of science, as I like to call it, couldn't exist because there are no agents, there are no beings, there's nothing that can actually engage in an intellectual exercise to make observations and then reason to conclusion.
Got it. Okay.
So that's ultimately the point I'm making for that second. So the first necessary condition is that the universe is structured. It is intelligible such a way it can be in principle understood. The second is that there are beings that can engage in a legitimate process of deliberation in order to make observations and reach conclusions.
Okay.
So the next question, so this is where we're getting into sort of in the philosophy realm. So this is understanding what science is. And based on my experience studying science and what I know to be true about scientific experiments and the history of science, I have to believe, yes, we are uncovering true facts about reality.
Okay.
So I believe we have a legitimate discipline known as science that gets us towards truth. But what does that imply about the nature of existence, the nature of reality? Well, how do you explain the structure in the universe? And how do you explain the legitimate process of deliberation that we have as beings? Those are the ultimate philosophical questions that need to be answered. And as a Christian, this part comes kind of from a talk that I give. It's called Truths and Lies About Science and Faith.
Okay.
But the subsection is science as a or Christianity as a philosophical catalyst for science. That is, if you have a Christian doctrine, Christian doctrines actually provide these necessary conditions in order to engage in science in the first place. So one of them being
sorry. How does Christianity provide I forgot the word. Sorry, specifically what you said, but you said it.
The necessary conditions in order for us to have science in the first place.
So I definitely reject that. Could you please provide an example?
Yeah. So look at the first necessary condition. That is the inherent intelligibility of the universe. Well, if you look at some sort of doctrine of creation, and this would be similar across any theistic model of reality. And I would say deism would almost be excluded by this. There's some nuance there, but when you look at something like Christianity or the Judeo-Christian worldview, you have a God you have some being who structures the universe intentionally, right? You expect there to be structure behind the universe,
So
based on when you look at some sort of God who creates, right?
I just want to make sure I'm following you. So first you said that Christianity provides the necessary foundations for science, but now you're throwing God in the mix. Um, can you explain how those two tie in? Is it Christianity or God?
Well, so we can generalize it a little bit to the Judeo-Christian worldview, if you will. But I think this would be applicable to any sort of theistic model. I am open to more conversation about that.
Okay.
But as an example, if you look at the Christian doctrine of creation, right? This isn't a discussion about old Earth, young Earth, evolution, anything like that. It's just bare bones doctrine of creation. The universe is structured intentionally. You have a being who structures the universe. And so you expect the universe to be structured.
Are you just saying that from a Christian standpoint, or are you specifically making that claim?
Well, this is classical theism altogether, whether you're Christian or it's a Jewish model or anything like that. Classical theism maintains that there's a God who created the universe, right? And is in some way active in that universe, whether it's sustaining the universe or meddling with the universe miraculously, something like that. God is the creator and somehow involved. Deism is sort of God creates and lets go and lets things unwind. And if you're taking an atheism model, you just don't include God in the worldview at all.
Right. Because
those are sort of the distinctions.
So I'm still, I guess, a little confused, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but I'm not seeing. So first we started with science, but now we're saying Christianity gets us to science.
Sure.
I guess I'm not understanding if I can apply science from an atheistic worldview, why would I need Christianity?
Well, to explain science, right? To make sense of the fact that you do science in the first place.
Why does science need to be?
That we're on, right? So we talked about what science was. We're in agreement on what science is, and that science is a search for truth. Right. But the question is, what does that fact indicate about the nature of reality? That's what we're fleshing out here. We're looking at, okay, based on what we know about science, what is entailed by that information about the nature of reality? That's the question we're asking. And that's where we're sort of a deep dive into what science is and how science works gets you towards God. That's sort of where I'm trying to go here.
So to give an example from I'd like to give an example from Kenneth real quick. I'm trying to stay within the topic of where we're at. The universe creating leprechauns would provide a similar structure, but this is not a sufficient justification to believe a universe creating leprechauns.
The universe creating leprechauns. Okay. So I guess we can. Maybe I got ahead of myself by sort of using God in a shorthand type kind of fashion. When doesn't matter what you call it, right? When we're talking about God here, we can just say, in order for there to be this structured universe, you can explain the structure of the universe by some sort of external agent who itself is not internal to the universe and has some sort of personal ability, some sort of agency to it to create and structure.
But why does it need to be explained by an external structure or deity?
Because we're explaining the totality of the universe, all that exists within the universe, right? Science applies to everything inside the universe. We can even expand it to the multiverse if we want. But
I love the multiverse concept.
Science implies we can circle back to that if you want, but then science applies to that which is within the universe or the multiverse, and to explain the existence of that thing, of that you need to appeal to something that is not it.
Why?
Well, for example, could you explain your own existence?
I mean, outside of me being my parents, having sex and giving birth to me,
Right. You are what's known as a contingent being. You're contingent. You are non-necessary. You do not exist out of necessity. So you are contingent. Everything in the universe that we observe is contingent. Matter is created, transferred into energy. It's contingent. And so it requires an explanation. It requires an explanation external to itself.
Okay, so let's say it requires an explanation external to itself. I guess where I'm still a little lost is why that explanation needs to be supernatural in nature. Like, how are we drawing this line to get from? Because here's what it sounds like. It sounds like you're saying I don't have an explanation, so therefore God did it. And I'm not trying to put words in your mouth. I'm just trying to understand.
Yeah. So a lot of times people misconstrue theistic arguments as God of the gaps when they're attempting to be. Sometimes they might not be presented properly, but they are what's known as inference to the best explanation in many cases, which is it's different, right? So what we're looking at here is, let me try and get my words right. We're looking at the universe, and we're saying the universe itself has some sort of structure. Now, how do you explain that structure is the question you need to ask, right? It could be the case that the universe was something like a random number generator, or in my field of work, we test our detectors with a what's known as a signal to noise ratio test. Okay. We're interested in signal, but there's a whole lot of noise that we need to make sure we don't get. And the universe, in order to give us information, in order for us to be able to understand the universe needs to be something that gives us some sort of intelligible signal. It could just be all noise, right? There's no reason to expect that the universe follows any sort of set structure, any sort of laws, anything like that. Those don't seem to be necessary. So there's no reason we ought to expect it on any sort of just the universe is all that there is model. But if you have something external to the universe, then you can look at, well, that thing external to the universe could structure the universe in such a way that it is intelligible. So with respect to the first necessary condition, my point here is really, and I don't want to spend the whole time talking about this one point. My point is that it makes more sense, given that the universe is intelligible in principle, that is more easily explained if the universe is structured by an external agent than without.
I have to reject that, and here's why. Do you have any method of, for example, creating a test to show the likelihood of it being a god versus not being a god, or being something else? So, for example, I could say I believe a better explanation for the universe being created was giant pixies. Now, no, I know I'm not trying to. I'm just using that as an example. So, I guess what's the difference? Because I could just say, well, pixies is a better explanation, so I'm jumping on that.
Right. So the reason I laugh is it reminded me of this hilarious exchange with a scientist named Lewis Wolpert and a philosopher William Lane Craig, where Wolpert's pushing back on Dr. Craig, and he's saying, well, a computer created everything. And Craig rightly shows out, computers are physical things, right? And they are physical within the universe. What created the universe has to be non-physical because it's external to the universe. It created all that is physical. And Wolpert shoots back, oh, this is a special computer that's not physical. And so what you do is you're just kind of, when you actually look at what is necessary to explain the universe, you can call it pixies if you want, but I'm going to ask you, what do those pixies look like? And if you say things like, well, they're pink, they have wings, I'm going to say, well, you're employing color, you're employing physical objects, right? Wings, those are things that are phenomena within the universe. So those don't apply to anything that can explain the origin of the universe or the structure of the universe, because such things have to be external to the universe. So say you want to strip those characteristics from pixies, well, these are non-physical pixies. Well, then you're
That's
just
where I was going.
closer and closer, and you're just fitting the bill for this theistic God. As soon as you do that, then you just have to ask, what are the characteristics of this being you're proposing? And once you start making it coherent, you end up with theism.
So I feel like there's a lot of leaps here. Real quick, just clarification for the audience. Lori Thompson wants to know if you are an apologetic. I don't believe you are. Is that correct?
Am I what?
Do you practice Christian apologetics?
Sure.
Oh, you do? Okay, I didn't know that. Then I guess he is. He has
an apologist, but
an apologist. Sorry, misspoke. So
here's the thing. That's just because I'm passionate about what I believe, right? So apologetics is simply just providing reasons for what you believe. That's essentially what an apologetic is. Okay. So if you're passionate about what you believe, you are, and you talk to people about it, you are an apologist for whatever that is.
Okay. So to backtrack a little bit, how
6 minutes in, you're going to backtrack?
So because we're making a lot of leaps here. We're saying that the explanation has to be external. Then we're jumping and saying, religion has the model to explain everything. Christianity has the model to explain everything. And I still don't know how or why we're jumping to, because science doesn't have this explanation, God is the explanation for it. Like, for example, how do we test?
It's not because science doesn't have this explanation. That's not the leap.
Okay.
The question is, does the fact of the structure of the universe make more sense on a worldview model that includes God versus one that doesn't? That's the comparison we're making. And the comparison is, when you include God, you get with that an explanation of the structure you see in the universe. When you don't include God, you don't have that explanation of the structure you see in the universe. You could say it's inexplicable. You might be able to say it's a brute fact, but those, in my opinion, come with very hefty intellectual prices that I'm just not willing to pay and say the structure of the universe is inexplicable. And I'm not willing to just say the structure of the universe is a brute fact, because it seems quite clearly that it could have been otherwise.
So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but it's, to me, the most intellectually responsible answer you could give is, I don't know. And it sounds like you're saying that, again, I'm not trying to repeat myself, but what I'm hearing is you're saying, I don't have an explanation, but this explanation makes sense to me. Therefore, that's the explanation. Now, the explanation you're providing doesn't make sense to me. So give me an example of how your explanation makes sense and why I should jump on board with it.
Well, I'm not quite so sure I followed the summary you were making there. Okay. With respect to the whole I don't know thing, I'm not one of those people who thinks you need 100% certainty to claim knowledge or anything like that. In fact, certainty and knowledge are kind of asymmetric terms. Certainty is a psychological concept, whereas knowledge has to do with beliefs. Okay. It's related to beliefs. So certainty and knowledge, I mean, I'm sure we've met people all the time who are certain about claims that were obviously false.
Right, of course.
So
like the Earth being flat,
really a relevant benchmark in this conversation. And so a lot of times people are like, well, you didn't prove 100%, so you don't really know. Well, sure, I'll back it down to just reason, right? The more reasonable conclusion is the one I'm going to follow. I don't need to know beyond a shadow of a doubt. I don't even think I need to know beyond a reasonable doubt. I think if something has the preponderance of the evidence, you're justified in believing it. So I'll go with, given the fact that a theistic model is capable of explaining the structure of the universe and an atheistic model does not provide a mechanism for explaining that, with respect to this first principle alone, the theistic model is more reasonable. That's where I'm going with that.
So off of that,
we're only on this first condition.
No,
the second condition is even more damning.
But here's the thing. I can't get to the second condition if I can't accept the first one.
Why?
So I need to wrap my mind around. I need to wrap my mind around the first one, because at the end of the conversation, we're supposed to understand how science got you to God. So if this is premise one or step one, I'm not accepting it. So how do we get to step two?
These aren't premises in an
Sorry,
argument.
I apologize, not premises.
These are necessary conditions. So the idea is, if atheism fails to provide one of these conditions, then atheism fails to provide.
I have to interrupt you real quick. Atheism only refers to the lack of belief. There is no scientific model in atheism. There's no worldview. It has nothing to do with science. It just simply means I don't believe in God.
Sure. But we can, although you and I would disagree on that, it's irrelevant to this conversation. Because remember when I started off, when you look at an atheistic model, right? Mm-hmm. I'm not I used atheism sort of shorthand. An atheistic model does not include God in the world. Whether that is due to actively believing God does not exist, or simply not believing God does exist, regardless of how you phrase it, the end result is the same. You don't include God in the worldview. And the point is, when you don't include God in the worldview, you have a really hard time justifying this enterprise that we call science as a truth-seeking enterprise. That's where I'm getting at. I could not, if I were to be an atheist, I could not see science as a truth-seeking enterprise, because it wouldn't have the foundation I would need it to have. That's what I'm getting at here.
Okay, science. Correct me if I'm wrong.
Structure behind the universe is inexplicable if you are left with a non-theistic model.
And what's wrong with that? If it's currently inexplicable, at least with what we know now, that's okay with me. I'm fine with that. What's the problem? Like, why? Because to me, it feels like you're doing what religion does, and you're creating questions and then providing the answers, when these are questions we don't even necessarily need. I don't want to say don't need to ask, but it just sounds like you're attaching extra baggage.
So I don't understand the premise of that, of it's a non-necessary question. I mean, if the universe is structured, it makes sense to ask the question of why it is structured to begin with.
Oh, sorry. Absolutely. But I guess, why are you saying, essentially, it sounds like you're saying it can't be explicable, or because it's explicable? I'm sorry. Because in an atheistic worldview, it's inexplicable. Therefore, Christianity, because it explains it. I'm still not seeing the tie-in. And to kind of
sorry, finish.
No, just to give an example of this comment, we don't yet understand the structure and complexity of the universe. It certainly doesn't help to invent an even more complex and mysterious deity as an explanation.
So the way that the way I'm reasoning here, it's not that we just don't understand. It's inexplicable. There is no mechanism to explain the structure of the universe.
Currently, that all we know of
is the things within the universe that are parts of the universe.
So
no amount of scientific research, no amount of further knowledge can answer a question that is in principle unanswerable.
Okay. Sorry, I gotta hold you to this. How do you know it's unanswerable?
Well,
or it will never be answerable.
So we've already covered that the universe itself, as we see it, is non-necessary. Everything we see around us is contingent. So we need to appeal to something external to whatever it is we see in order to explain it. But if the naturalistic world is all that we see, there's nothing within that external to it. That's just definitions.
Okay. So how do we get to, I guess, the supernatural side of it? Because...
Well, this is just saying something external to the natural world we see, something external to the universe, is responsible in some way for the structure that we see. That is at least a way to explain the structure of the universe. Now, if you don't like that explanation, I guess you could pick no explanation over some explanation, but that's not a decision I'm willing to make.
But why?
But why?
Yeah, why
Because it's reasonable. It's a reasonable explanation.
So is me saying, okay, so using, I guess, your logic or your argument, that could be applied to any religion or any belief system. Hey, I think this is more reasonable, therefore it is. I reject that it's more reasonable.
Sure. I haven't seen anything in this conversation that justifies that rejection, but
well,
right? I mean, you can't. I mean, so in dialogues, if you're just going to sit there and be like, "Well, I'm not convinced," right? Well, then we're not really having a conversation, because I don't know what can convince you. I don't know what your standard.
No, of course. I'm not saying you would know what would convince me.
But my point is that it's reasonable, right? There's at least an explanation of the structure of the universe. It at least makes sense why someone would say, "Hey, that's how science works," right? I'm not saying this is science, but that's what we do in science all the time. That's what black holes are. We see a phenomenon and we say, "Hey, there's a black," we come up with this idea of a black hole because it explains the phenomenon that we're seeing. That's part of science.
Okay.
Postulating entities in order to explain phenomena. That's really what science does in a large number of fields.
Can you define entities?
This is the same type of reasoning that we employ in science. We postulate something that explains the phenomenon. So we postulate something that explains the phenomenon of the structure of the universe. It's better than postulating nothing to explain the phenomenon of the universe. If I have an explanation and I don't have any reason to believe that that explanation cannot be true, it's reasonable to hold to that explanation over no explanation. I'm not necessarily going to say you have to be compelled, right? You're going to be irrational for rejecting it. I don't know, but it's at least reasonable. And where I'm saying it's more reasonable than not.
So, okay, I guess, how would you, so in science, things need to be tested and repeated, correct?
In many fields, subfields of science, yeah.
In every subfield, correct?
Paleontology and like evolutionary biology, when you're looking at sort of long periods of time ago, if there's a lot of evolutionary biology research that happens in the lab that is repeatable and testable, but when you're talking about sort of genetic ancestry, things that are historic sciences like paleontology, you could even throw in anthropology and archaeology, these types of things that feed into evolutionary biology. These are not repeatable phenomena.
Correct, but they can be.
We can use to test those, but they're not repeatable. But a lot of science is repeatable.
But they can be investigated, correct?
Yeah.
So how do we investigate? For instance, you're saying you believe God's more reasonable. Mm-hmm. How do we investigate that? Or test it in any way?
When we first talk, I mentioned a book by a guy named Joshua Rasmussen.
Okay.
And actually, oh man, it's like right there somewhere. This book.
Okay.
It's How Reason Can Lead to God. Maybe I should show this side so people.
It's upside down now.
I'm not as smart as I look. Anyway, How Reason Can Lead to God. You get the point. And his whole principle, that whole book is just starting with reason and using reason as your tool. Just the ability to use logic and reason to walk through and investigate how to explain reality. And I highly recommend that if you really want to dive into this question, you're going to have to read something like that. I can't do it justice in like 2 minutes.
Okay.
But investigative methods are not, the scientific method is not the only way to investigate something. If you're going to limit yourself to the scientific method, you're going to have a very small scope of knowledge.
Well, we don't have to limit ourselves to the scientific method. I would just like to understand how you tested this in any way, or okay, not even tested, you're able to actually investigate it. So for example, has there ever been any supernatural entity that has been positive, that has been demonstrated to be the cause of this phenomenon?
I don't exactly understand the question there.
Okay,
but
has there?
it doesn't matter. So you don't have to demonstrate something. You don't have to demonstrate that a deity existed and was the cause of a phenomenon in order to postulate a deity exists and can be the cause of the phenomenon. You can, it's like theoretical physics. You postulate some entity, you postulate some phenomenon, or you make some sort of theoretical postulate. Anyway,
Okay.
you make some sort of hypothesis, and you sort of work out using logic, using reason, what is entailed by that postulate. What needs to be true if that is true. And then you look at what is entailed by that and see if that meshes with other things you know, or see if you can maybe investigate somewhere else to see if that meshes with what you know. And so when we look at the structure of the universe, that's part of it. The universe is itself structured. That meshes with the notion that some being external to the universe intentionally structured it. That it's structured that way because an agent structured it.
But I guess can you show that an agent, one, that there is an agent, and two, that said agent did structure it?
Well, you can show that it makes sense. It makes sense as an explanation because it provides what you need in order to explain the structure.
But simply providing what you need, that I wouldn't rely on providing what you need, because essentially I could come up with my own explanation, and I could say, well, this provides what I need, therefore I'm going to believe this.
Sure.
So is there, I guess what I'm trying to understand
whatever you
is,
provide is going to have to be external to the universe. So it's going to have to be non-physical, non-material, non-temporal, and it's going to have some sort of agency to it, because otherwise it wouldn't be able to engage in any sort of activities such as structuring the universe.
So
there are things. So if you look at a universe that is structured and you're going to say, I'm going to explain this structured universe, there needs to be things that are true, or there are things that need to be true about whatever explanation you provide. That's what we're comparing it to. So if you're going to say, well, the electron, or say the law of gravity explains why the universe is structured, well, that's a bogus answer, because the law of gravity is part of the structure that needs explaining, right? So you can't just postulate anything. There are rules to how this theoretical entity relates to what it is you're explaining.
I get what you're saying, that you can't just postulate anything, and I agree with you there. But it sounds like you're just postulating God.
Sure.
Without
we could say that, but what I'm saying is something like God is necessary. So far as I can tell, right? We could go for hours about this and probably wouldn't exhaust, all the possibilities.
Right, of course.
But God makes sense of the structure of the universe. That's something that I think should be fairly uncontroversial. We might be able to look at, have more conversation about how, but
I mean, that's God, really controversial.
In principle, can provide an explanation. Would you accept that, given the structure of the universe, right? Given that the universe is structured, saying there is a being who intentionally structured that universe makes sense. It's at least a sensible explanation.
Can you do me a favor? Can you just repeat that one more time?
Yeah. So given that the universe has structure, that we have a structured universe that we can understand, or that can be understood, it makes sense if that universe, or if that structure is there because an agent gave it that structure, an agent structured it. it at least makes sense of what we observe. There might be other problems with that hypothesis.
Is it possible?
With respect to the question of how do you explain the structure of the universe, the answer of saying somebody structured it or something structured it makes sense.
See, I guess I could say it's possible, but I'm not. I can't go as far as to say it makes sense. But maybe you can help me get there. Why does it make sense, or how does it make sense?
I mean, because an agent has the capability. So an agent that is external to the physical universe has the capability of structuring the external universe. Or sorry, yeah, structuring the universe.
So if this agent has the, how do you even go to showing that an agent did this? So I'll grant you that is a possible explanation.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying it's plausible. I'm not even saying it makes sense. I agree that it is a possibility.
Okay.
How do you, because I'm just seeing there's a big gap here. How do we close this gap between you and I, so I can get from where I'm at to you're at? Because I'm not seeing something I can look into, test, and investigate. Like I need to find a way to understand this better, and how you're, because it sounds like you're taking a very big leap to get to it being an agent. So
Sure.
you're saying because it's structured, therefore it was an agent provided the structure for it.
And so are you saying it doesn't make sense, right? So are you saying it doesn't make sense to say an agent structured something that has structure? It doesn't make sense.
I would say, yeah, I want to be clear. I'm not saying it's not possible. It's of course possible. But yes, I'm saying it doesn't make sense.
So I'm trying to, I guess I don't understand. How can you say you see something with structure and the answer of something gave it that structure is a nonsensical explanation? How is that a nonsensical explanation?
I'm just saying I don't necessarily understand how it's a reasonable explanation.
Have you ever looked at something that had structure and said it had, and thought that someone structured
it? So I get where you're going and why.
Are you familiar with cryptograms?
I am not.
So cryptograms, I had a book of them. I used to do one a day. Those are it's the jumbled up letters. So like an A is really a Q. You see a T, it really stands for an H. And just from looking at the jumble of letters that they mean nothing to you as an English reader, you can tell there's structure there because of how the words are spaced with respect to one another.
Okay.
And that's the starting point. Because there's structure, you can then take the next step of trying to decode the cryptogram, because you assume that the structure is there because someone structured that jumble of letters. That's an incredibly reasonable conclusion. I mean, that's how we crack codes. We look for things that have structure. We might not be able to understand the structure, but we have to first identify structure, and we assume there's intent behind the structure. That's reasonable in just about any circumstance you can imagine. It just seems to me that when you're postulating a deity is when you kind of raise this red flag of, well, that's not a reasonable explanation.
Well, because I don't think
you might have other reasons to doubt that a deity exists, right? There might be other reasons there. But with respect to explaining the structure, it makes sense.
So let me ask you this. Do you have an example of something that doesn't have a creator or a designer?
I don't follow.
Okay, so you believe the universe is created, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you have an example or a way to test that the universe was not created? Because if you're saying it's created, you have to be able to essentially show your work that there not only it was created, but there is a creator. So do you have an example of something else that we would be able to test outside? Sorry, I'm kind of tripping over my words here.
So I'd really like to move on to the second necessary condition at some point.
Okay, so we can move on to the second condition.
We've kind of gone in circles around this for a little bit.
Sure.
Granted that with respect to this first condition, a deity a God is an explanation that is possible, right? Now, it's a possible explanation, and I would take a possible explanation over no explanation as the more reasonable answer. That's kind of where I come down at. You might not agree with that line of reasoning, but it makes sense. At least from where I'm standing, rather sitting, it makes sense. But
so if you want to move on to the second one, yeah, that's fine. As long as I need to point out that the first one still doesn't make sense to me. But I'm okay with moving on to the second one, as long as you understand that I'm not accepting your first reason. As long as we're in agreement, then we can absolutely move on to the second one.
Can you at least see what I'm getting at?
I see where you're trying to go, but I don't agree with your methods of getting there. I'm not seeing a very clear and concise line. I'm still seeing, and I'm not trying to repeat the God of the gaps with you, because you could say it's not, I could say it is, but I'm still not getting that clear line. I'm just seeing from my reasoning skills a gigantic jump. So essentially, I feel like you're saying, well, since you don't have an explanation, my explanation provides the necessary conditions for this to be correct. And any religion can do that. So I see no distinction with your argument. Secondly,
to this point, there isn't a distinction between Christianity and many other religions with respect to this first point.
Okay. Then let's just say that the reasoning skills you're using can be applied to anything. I can come up and make up an explanation and then say, well, it seems possible, so therefore, to me, it makes sense. Therefore, that's the explanation. And that's where I'm really getting hung up on.
Again, you can come up with any hypothesis you want, but mine is the way I'm getting to God is just being a title for the thing that has the properties that we would need in order to explain the structure of the universe. So whatever hypothesis you come up with would fit that description, provided you didn't include something that makes it inconsistent with being a creator of the universe. So that's kind of where I'm getting at. And this can be an exercise that we can do offline if you really want. But
sure.
For right now, there's still, without postulating something external to the universe, there's no explanation of the structure of the universe. So you don't have an explanation for what it is that gives us the foundation of doing science in the first place.
And that's okay, though. And that's fine. And that's why you and I should just say, okay, we don't know. Let's continue to look.
Except there's something that I found over here that's a reasonable explanation. And if it's a reasonable explanation, it's better than no explanation. That's where I'm getting at. Maybe we haven't agreed on it being a reasonable explanation, but if it was a reasonable explanation, it would be better than no explanation. You don't have to know with certainty, but it would be better than no explanation.
But why would just assuming an explanation be better than no explanation? To me, again, I'm still confused why you're not just saying, I don't know. Why you're saying, well, my explanation is better, therefore it's more likely. Now, just because I don't have an explanation, that doesn't lead credence to your explanation. Now, if your explanation is better than mine, that still doesn't make it any more true.
If it's better, it makes it more reasonable.
More reasonable, but that doesn't necessarily make it true.
Sure, but we ascertain truth by following what is reasonable. What is more reasonable than the alternatives, that's how we reliably get to truth. You don't reliably get to truth by betting on the least reasonable possibilities. So if you can have an option that is more reasonable than the alternatives, that's more likely to be true. That's ultimately what we mean when we say it's more reasonable.
See, but here's the thing. It's more realistic for you. It's not more realistic for me. And I want to give an example. So
well, hold on a second.
Oh, yeah,
you already said it's a possible explanation, right?
Is it a possibility? Yes.
Right. So but it has a reasonable level, so probability level greater than 0.
Okay.
That's better than no explanation.
But why? Again, you're just saying because this explanation is more reasonable, therefore it's true. And I can't wrap my head around that, because just because it's possible doesn't make it reasonable. I don't necessarily think it's a reasonable explanation. And to kind of give you an example, when I was a Christian, Larry in the audience is probably cringing right now. But when I was a Christian, I would have absolutely agreed with you. I would have said this is a more reasonable explanation because you, atheists, don't have one. And to me, that's fallacious reasoning at its finest. Simply someone else not having an explanation doesn't make yours more plausible, believable, or in any way leading to the truth.
Again, I tried to draw a distinction between not having an explanation and not being able to provide one, in principle. Not being able to provide one.
Real quick, Duelist Theology wants to have divine disbelief on your YouTube channel to talk about it. And I'd love to have you both on my channel to talk about it. And just so everyone's aware, Thursday is Ask an Atheist Day. I do need one more atheist, ideally female. So we have a good balance between men and women. Well, it doesn't have to be female, whatever. But Thursday, 5:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time, we have 4 atheists coming on the show from 3 different countries. Can't see my fingers. 3 different countries. So I'm pretty excited about that. Apologize. I had to plug that though, especially when I saw someone talking about
your show.
But I apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off. Please continue.
Sure. Yeah, I kind of feel like we've beaten a dead horse here for a while.
So do you want to? No, you're right. We're not finding a place to agree. So if you want to move on to your
the second point,
right, and if you do have any questions in the comments for myself or Lucas, feel free to ask them. We'll get to them shortly. So sorry, go ahead.
So the second point has to do with having intelligent creatures, and by intelligent creatures we mean creatures that have the ability to engage in legitimate processes of deliberation, right? We can observe phenomena and engage in a legitimate process of deliberation to reach conclusions. That's what we do when we do science. So the question that you have to ask yourself is, well, what is true if you have I'm assuming, and I think I heard you say this in a conversation with someone earlier, but would you have a materialist anthropology?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
So do you think there is anything to the human person that is non-physical?
So sorry, do I think there's anything outside of what's observable? Like, for instance, do I think there's
a human person that is non-physical?
That sounds like
more than a material object.
More than a material object? I guess it depends on what you're referring to, because I mean, are you talking about thoughts, or are you trying to go into a soul or conscious outside of the human mind?
I mean, it can kind of go there, but what I'm getting at is when you're talking about the human being, I think on an other conversation you had, I forget who it was with, you mentioned something that you don't believe that there's a mind that's distinct from the brain. You think it's all just the brain.
Absolutely.
Right. So the brain is a physical, it's fundamentally a physical thing, right?
Correct.
So there's nothing about us that is inherently non-physical. We are physical objects. We are physical beings.
Right.
Merely physical beings.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Sorry. That's all I wanted to clarify.
Oh,
I probably
okay.
didn't ask the question right to begin with, and I think that's consistent with an atheistic model. I think there are pretty you're hard pressed to find an atheistic model that includes a non-physical component to human beings. You might be able to find some, but given the atheistic model, you have a non-physical, or sorry, you have a purely physical existence.
Okay.
So the question comes down to how do you have a legitimate process of deliberation with a purely physical object? When we know that what happens in physical systems really one of two things. It's either deterministic or it's chaotic. In either of those cases, the end result is really just necessitated by the initial conditions and the conditions that come up. Right?
Okay.
That's how physical objects work. If you have a science, if you have molecules in a room, they move, they operate, there's no choice in the matter. Well, if you are nothing but what is produced by your brain, that is the same thing about everything you say, do, and think. It's produced by your brain operating under these laws of nature. Think about it like a calculator. Right, when I type in 2 + 2 equals, and I expect my calculator to give me an answer, the answer is going to be 4. The calculator doesn't go through and sort of analyze, well, what is 2? What is this plus operator that we're doing? And when he said equals, what am I supposed to answer? Is it 5? Is it 3? It doesn't go through any sort of process. The structure of the calculator necessitates the outcome of 4 given the inputs of 2 + 2 and then hitting the equal sign.
Okay.
That's how something is merely a physical structure. That's how it operates. So if your brain is merely a physical structure, it's 2 + 2 = 4. You're not thinking about it. Your brain is cascading through its own structure and producing the result necessitated by that structure. That eliminates the possibility of legitimate deliberation because you're not actually weighing alternatives. Whatever your outcome is the result of a process you had no control over. It was merely dominoes cascading through the logic.
Okay.
And I'll throw out there, like, if you look at many atheistic philosophers, Alex Rosenberg, I believe, would be one. He kind of just flat out says, your brain is logic gates. There is no you. This isn't really an uncontroversial claim. It's just a hard pill to swallow, is what it is. But the point is, you eliminate, unless you have some grounds for agency, you eliminate the possibility of a legitimate process of deliberation, which undermines the legitimacy of the scientific enterprise altogether. You cannot claim to actually be obtaining truth when you do science if every conclusion you make is necessitated by the physical structure of your brain.
Okay. I'm still, I guess, I get where you're going, but I'm still not seeing how. I know you didn't want to call it a premise. How any of this gets me to God.
Right. Well, God is an external agent. And again, on the Christian worldview, I'll throw this out there: the doctrine of the Imago Dei, right? The doctrine of man includes that we are created in the image of God, so we would expect to have some sort of rational faculty. Now, the problem, whether it's Christian or not, you can only have the ability to ground rational faculties, agency, if you will, if you have an agent to provide it. Agency doesn't appear out of physics. You don't get agency out of physics.
Can you define agency?
Yeah, so agency pretty much just means that when I say that I exist, I am an agent. That means the things I say and do are not causally determined by factors outside of myself. So it's not physics that's determining my actions. There is a legitimate person. There's a me that determines that there's a me that is responsible for causing what it is that I do, not the physics or anything around me causing what I do.
Okay. I feel like this might.
So we can flip it another way.
Yeah,
the fundamental nature of reality must have agency if agency is to exist anywhere in reality. Because agency is not something that will emerge from things that are not themselves capable of having agency. So the fundamental nature of reality must have agency if we are to have agency at all.
But why?
You could deny that we have agency.
I'm not denying that. I'm just saying, like, why does there have to be an external agent? So I'm doing my best to keep up, and this it probably would have been better if I would have gotten an atheist scientist that would be able to.
I don't know if that would have been better. You probably would have needed an atheist philosopher.
An atheist philosopher, atheist scientist, one of the two. I need someone that could keep up with you a little bit better. And
sure.
I'm trying to understand, but I'm not seeing a clear line from here to there. And that's kind of what I'm looking for so unlike, I don't want to say unlike most atheists, I want to say unlike many atheists. I don't know. I don't even want to say that because that's a claim. I want the truth wherever it. Sorry, I'm just.
Am I allowed to say what I'm thinking?
Absolutely, please.
Remember, it kind of sounds like you're allergic to claims there for a minute.
But no, so
that's a little low, but I.
Oh, dude, you got to understand. Joel told me. I asked him directly, "Do you think I'm going to hell?" He said yes. I don't get offended or upset. To me, this is more about the conversation. Right. And honestly, to me, the relationships get better the more you can have friendly banter. You know, right. The more we can throw those fun jabs. So no, please,
hence the shirt.
Yes. So you wore that shirt and I can't find mine. I was going to change my shirt to say, science doesn't care what you believe in, which would have been perfect, but I couldn't find it.
Yeah.
So I guess where I'm trying to get is, can you get me, dumb it down for me? Okay. Mm-hmm. I don't have your education. Help me get from where I'm at to where you're at, because again, I'm just seeing a lot of I know Larry likes saying this, you're consistent. You are consistent in your beliefs. But again, I'm still seeing a gigantic leap. There's this huge gap right here that's not being filled in. So it sounds, at least how I'm interpreting it, you're kind of jumping your argument from here to here. How can we fill in this area that I'm not understanding?
Right. So I didn't go through the due diligence of making this sort of like a propositional argument where the logic was, different premises and conclusions from that. If I do have a whiteboard, I probably could take another shot at that some other time. But when we're seeking truth is hardly ever a clear, straight line. there's a lot of back and forth that happens when we seek truth. That's one of the what I don't want to say surprised by when I started like actually reading books. I can count on like one hand the number of books I read like on my own time before I entered college. I was not a reader. And when I became a truth seeker is when I started picking up books and books and books, and you find that there's all sorts of nuances in things.
Right.
And I'm not going to be able to give you a straight line to anything. If you can give a straight line to this, you're probably oversimplifying it. These are not simple things, but to try and simplify it the best I can.
Okay.
You have, if you accept that science is a truth-seeking enterprise, that when we do science, we operate as we find truth about reality. If you accept that, then you need the nature of reality to be one. It needs to have an intelligible structure. It needs to be intelligible. In principle, if there was an intelligent agent, the universe could be understood. Two, you would need to have intelligent agents who are capable of engaging in a legitimate process of deliberation. But if you start with science, which I think we both do, and we start with science as a truth-seeking enterprise, we also have to include the universe is intelligible and it has intelligent agents who can engage in legitimate processes of deliberation. So then the next question is, how do we get those things? How do we explain those things? And it makes more sense, is what I'm saying, is that in the explanation of that, you can get from an agent, from the fundamental nature of reality, being an agent, to explain intelligent agents within reality. You can't get from the fundamental nature of reality being no agent to be having agents in reality.
Okay. I'm having a little trouble following.
Okay.
Can you?
I'm trying to think about this. So, like, say I'm building a wall.
Okay.
Right. And I want to build a blue wall. If the only things I have to work with are orange bricks, I'm never going to build a blue wall.
Okay.
Because orange bricks are not the type of thing that can make a blue wall. So when we're looking at pure physics, pure physical objects, they are not the types of things that can create agency. Because the only things that you get with physical objects is determinism and chaos. And both those options preclude agency. They preclude an individual making choices and causing the end result.
If I'm being straightforward, I don't know how to address that. I think what I'm going to need to do is get someone with a scientific background that can better understand what you're saying, because I was hoping to to get it simplified a little bit, but it just seems like there's a lot of things being.
So the wall wasn't simple.
No, the wall was absolutely simple, but that was a great explanation.
You're having trouble seeing how agency is like the wall.
Yeah, I guess you could say that, or why we even need said external agent, and that's where I guess I'm having trouble. We're gonna get to questions in probably like 2 to 3 minutes. Puck, I saw you had a couple questions, but I can't scroll back far enough. So if you could just re-ask your question in the comment, whether it be for me or Lucas, please have questions for me as well, because I don't want to just sit here and fire a bunch of questions at Lucas. So sorry, go ahead.
I didn't have anything else to say.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I guess let me know what questions you have in the comments. Real quick, tomorrow, I am super excited. I know you're not a fan of the Atheist Experience, but I am. And Jenna Belk from the Atheist Experience is coming on my show at 5:30 p.m. Central Daylight Time. Sorry, 5 p.m. Central Daylight Time. And I am super excited. I'm nervous because I've been watching that show for like 3 years. But anyways, that's not important. So here we go. First question is from Puck. Question for Lucas. If two people take a math test and one person leaves a question blank and one person answers that question with a wrong answer, is the wrong answer a better answer?
Well, I can tell you as someone who used to be a physics teaching assistant, in almost every case, the person who gave the wrong answer would at least get partial credit, and therefore it would be a better answer. Because they at least did something and showed some form of reasoning. The bottom line is the question itself probably isn't really analogous to what we're talking about here. But if you put down an answer, you have a higher likelihood of that answer being right than if you put down no answer. Just like if you buy a lottery ticket, you have a higher likelihood of winning the lottery than if you don't win the lottery.
So just because you have a chance at being right doesn't mean you are right.
Sure.
Or doesn't even necessarily
right.
Right.
But we need to look at the alternatives. And then go with what's reasonable.
But would you agree, and let's just take religion out of it, that just because something is possible doesn't necessarily mean it's just because something is possible doesn't necessarily make it true or even be, would you agree with that?
Yeah, of course, possibility doesn't mean truth. Possibility doesn't mean that something's inherently reasonable. However, when you're comparing options and you have to make it, and you're making a choice on which of these is the most reasonable option.
So, all right, let's take the religion out of it. I don't have an explanation for, let's just say, how mac and cheese was made. I'm just trying to simplify it.
Again, it's not you don't have an explanation. It's the tools you're working with cannot provide an explanation.
So, okay,
remember,
the tools I'm working with.
Go back to the wall thing, right? The orange bricks cannot be used to create a blue wall. That's the argument. It's not you don't have an explanation compared to I have an explanation. It's I have an explanation and you, in principle, cannot have an explanation. Because the tools you have to work with do not provide you with what you need.
At this point in time. Correct?
Tell me what additional information you can have that would get a blue wall from orange bricks.
Oh, sorry. I thought we were talking about like specifically religion. I don't, but the thing is,
I don't know if am I frozen?
No, now you're frozen. Do you have any other questions for Lucas or me? We're going to be signing off in a moment. His camera just froze, which kind of sucks. If you could like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. Also on Facebook, your friendly neighborhood atheist. Thursday is Ask an Atheist Day. Pretty excited about that. It is going to be I'm totally mixing up the times in my head. I don't know what happened to Lucas. It kind of stinks. Hopefully he'll rejoin in a moment. What questions do you have for Lucas? What questions do you have for me? My schedule is on my Facebook, Your Friendly Neighborhood Atheist. I'm hoping he comes back in a moment so we can ask those more tough questions. But one of the ones, there we go.
Sorry,
we're good.
Blaming.
No problem. So, all right, I guess we've definitely gone in a lot of circles, and it kind of stinks because I don't feel like we got to make as much progress as I would have liked to. And that could be due to my own, limitations and understanding. I'm willing to accept that. Hopefully, I can find someone with significantly more knowledge to talk with you on this, because I feel like there are so many things I am missing here, and maybe it's my own fault for wanting a clear line, because to me, most things in life, when you get to that explanation, there's a very easy step to go from A to B. And right now I'm just seeing the A to C. And I really want to get that centerpiece. So hopefully maybe we can find someone else that could better get me there, or possibly, debate with you on the topic of science better than I'm doing, because I'm obviously not doing a very good job.
I mean, again, I don't necessarily view this as a debate so much as a dialogue.
Sorry. Yeah,
so
I apologize. I should
not.
I need to remove the term debate. I need to stop saying
I don't
that.
and I don't necessarily think in an hour and a half I'm going to get anyone from where they are to where I'm at entirely. I mean, again, anything I know because I've spent a lot of time trying to study it, and that doesn't necessarily translate into being able to articulate it the right way. So, what other questions were coming in? I probably missed some as I was in, limbo or something.
So, if there's any other quick questions, we're going to be signing off in a moment. Please put them in the comments, whether it be for me or for Lucas. I do have one question. Is there what is your best argument for a belief in God? Like, if right now someone said, I want to believe in God, give me your best argument, lay it out for me, what would that be?
My best argument?
Yes.
That really depends on the day. I think the most sound argument is probably the contingency argument, but we've touched on that a little bit and you've struggled with it. But the contingency argument itself goes something like this. Everything that exists has an explanation of its existence, either in the necessity of its own nature or in an external cause. The universe exists, then if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. The universe exists, therefore the universe has an explanation of its existence, therefore the explanation of the universe's existence is God, therefore God exists.
Is that the Kalam?
No, the Kalam's different. That one's actually easier, and I do really like that one. That one is everything that begins to exist has a cause, or you could modify it to say, if the universe began to exist, then the universe had a cause. The universe began to exist, therefore the universe had a cause. That's the easiest one, I think, to remember and to go down. Where people tend to get hung up on is that final point where, well, what is the cause? And that's kind of where we got caught up on here. Right. What needs to be true about a thing that can cause the universe to come into existence? That thing needs to be external to the universe because it's causing the universe to exist. That thing needs to be immaterial. It needs to be non-spatial. It needs to then, and this is where agency comes in, because only agents have the ability to cause things to cause things to happen willfully. So if the universe began to exist, which it seems to be the case that it did, the most reasonable conclusion is that there was a non-physical, non-spatial, non-temporal personal agent that caused it to exist. That's sort of the summary of the Kalam.
So I guess can you, okay, well, here, this works. Can you demonstrate that the universe began to exist?
I mean, demonstrate in what sense? I mean, scientifically, if you take the standard Big Bang model, right, it appears that the universe began to exist, right? We can calculate the beginning of the universe to approximately 14 billion years ago. If you look at the Born-Guth-Vilenkin theorem, any system that is on average in a state of expansion throughout its existence, throughout time, must come to a terminal point at the beginning of time. So this is an on average thing, right? Okay. So even if you have some sort of like cyclical universe, the thing about cyclical universes is there's a type of conservation of entropy where each cycle is physically larger than the one that preceded it. So even with that, you have an average expansion. So cyclical models don't actually get you away from the beginning. There's also the problem with the second law of thermodynamics. The second law of thermodynamics if you look at what this means about the universe itself in a finite amount of time will reach a state of heat death. So that means there is no more usable energy in the universe.
Correct.
You don't have stars burning. You don't have human beings with functioning metabolisms. Every bit of energy that exists is non-usable. Now, that might be 10 to the 100 years in the future, from the beginning of this universe. So given a universe that's under the second law of thermodynamics, that might be from when that universe starts to when you reach this entropic heat death, you're 10 to the 100 years. That's still finite. That's not infinite.
Okay.
The fact that we do not observe a universe in entropic heat death means the universe had a beginning at some point in the past. Because if the universe did not have a beginning, we would have already been at that point of entropic heat death because it would have occurred in a finite amount of time. So the second law of thermodynamics doesn't mesh with an eternal universe.
So
but you also have problems philosophically. You have problems philosophically with the impossibility of an actual infinite number of things existing. You run into some pretty weird things if you look at the mathematics of infinity. Hilbert's hotel is one of those things. Then there's even if you could grant that an actual infinite number of things could exist, you can never achieve an actual infinite number of things using successive addition, which is what would have to be the case temporally in order for us to have a past infinite, time, because time is like it's like successive addition, okay, one after another event. So you would never be able to have an infinite number of past events because you can never achieve infinity using successive addition. And then there's this really weird thing out there. It's called the Grim Reaper paradox that I could not explain. What?
I never heard that one before.
Well, I couldn't explain it to you right now. And that's like when you're talking about things that are really deep in the weeds philosophically, that's way deep in the weeds philosophically. Okay. And so I can send you a video after that. But if you look up the Grim Reaper paradox,
I will.
It essentially demonstrates that there is a logical contradiction with the notion that the universe is infinite in the past. I said a lot of words there.
Yes.
So and again, that was sort of, you gave me a couple minutes. I took more than that.
No, that's fine.
Those are a lot of reasons to think that the universe began to exist.
Okay. I want to jam through these last couple questions real quick. Yeah. Last question for Lucas. It is reasonable to believe that you can win 1 in a billion lottery. Is it reasonable to go broke buying lottery tickets because of that reasonable belief?
I don't necessarily think it's reasonable to believe that you will be the one to win lottery tickets, or win a 1 in a billion lottery. That would only be reasonable if you had 500 million and one distinct lottery tickets to, that's when your expectation value would exceed 50%. But apart from that, it's not reasonable.
Okay. I don't think this is really a question. This is more a statement from Cynthia McDonald, who will be on the show Thursday for Ask an Atheist Day. Even knowing that the universe had an origin time of approximately 14 billion years ago and will reach a point of heat death, that still does not point to a creator of the universe.
It does if the first premise of the Kalam is true.
Okay.
Right. So the scientific evidence points to the second premise being true, that the universe began to exist. If it is also true that the first premise is true, then the conclusion follows inescapably.
So real quick, divine disbelief. I think it would be really good to have you and Lucas talk. That's all I'm going to say. I'm reading your comments and I'm like, wow, I would like to see you two sit down. So if you're interested, I don't know. I'm definitely going to check out your channel after this. If you're interested, let me know, because I'm trying to set up other, not debates, discussions, unless you're interested in a formal debate.
I don't have time to craft opening arguments, rebuttals, closing arguments. Nobody has time for that.
Okay. No, I get that. Doulos. And I feel bad. Everyone's asking you questions. Usually there's actually more questions for me, but apparently
That
this
is a
time
good or a bad job.
I don't know. Who knows? Lucas, do you
Can
have?
someone answer that in the comments real quick for me?
Is it, he wants to know if he's doing a bad job. Please put your answer in the comments. Do you have presuppositions in your reasoning that you use to dismiss God? If so, what are they, and how do you justify them?
Oh no!
What? Did you freeze again?
It looks like you were freezing. Sorry.
Oh no.
Is that? Do I have presuppositions in my reasoning that I use to dismiss God?
Correct.
If so, what are they, and how? I don't understand. Do I have presuppositions in my reasoning that I use to dismiss God?
I'm kind of I don't really get that question either. Maybe
honestly, I heard the question. I'm not like close enough to read what the questions are, so I thought it was aimed at you. To be honest, based on how it was phrased.
Right. But no, yeah, he says at Lucas. Maybe if you could rephrase the question. Yes, that would be a good conversation. Scientific evidence points to the first premise being true. Feel free to speak with an astrophysicist. There was one other one I wanted to get through. Okay.
Scientific evidence speaks to the second premise being true.
Okay.
But I also think the philosophical arguments, if sound, override the scientific evidence. Because the philosophical evidence, if sound, those arguments are based on formal logic, which is logically prior to science.
Okay. Cynthia McDonald, if the first premise was true, which still has not been demonstrated.
You're right. That wasn't part of the conversation we had today.
I think I think he said what the F, I think my keyboard is broken. Anyways, as usual, you know what the great thing about doing this is? One, I gotta be honest, Lucas, I love doing this. Like, I love the opportunity to be able to learn and talk to other people. Since starting this 2 months ago, I have been talking with people all over the world, and it's been so much fun. And although today we weren't able to, draw that line or get me to where you're at, I want to get there. If what you believe is true, I genuinely want to get there.
I think that would take several more discussions.
Absolutely.
Probably not live stream discussions.
No, absolutely. And that's fine. We could do
it. We would probably have to wait until this whole pandemic, pans out.
We'll sit down. I don't drink beer, but we'll sit down and have a beer. So
you just not drink?
But what'd you say? Oh yeah, I'll just have water.
Or just not beer.
Oh no, I'm not a drinker. So I used to I used to work in the bar all the time.
And we could have this conversation offline. Yeah. I'm sorry.
No, dude. So here's the thing. In my opinion, just sitting here debating and not humanizing the discussion doesn't get us anywhere. Now, sorry, we're not debating, but what I mean is I like having a conversation. I want people to tune in and not just stick to their sides. I want atheists to hear the Christian side.
Mm-hmm.
I want Christians to hear the atheist side. And that's why, to me, humanizing the discussion is very important. So talking about getting a beer or a drink together, I'm all for that, because it shows we're not just stuck on our beliefs. We can move past them. And that, to me, is very important to show that we can happily coexist.
Yeah.
But I guess one of the most important questions I do want to ask you, and I'm sorry I didn't give you a chance to ask me any questions if you want to ask one. But was I fair to you? Was this was the forum open for you to do your best possible job and keep the exchange even?
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think it was. I think first, I would like to thank you for having me on. This is the first time I've ever done any sort of live stream conversation like this.
Oh, awesome. So, I popped your cherry.
But a lot of times stuff like this, you don't know what you're jumping into. I watched several of your dialogues before I even, before we even sat down to have a conversation. And I like what you're doing here.
Thank you.
I think it was very fair. It's always hard. And this is the struggle with it, with part of why this can't be a debate show is because the debates are sort of framed in like yes, no, and people present their arguments for one. There's no such thing as a debate between yes and I'm not convinced, right? That's not a debate. And so I don't really expect to come in here and convince you of much of anything. I expect to just kind of lay out my reasoning and sort of have a conversation about that.
Yeah, I agree.
And with that goal, I think we accomplished that. And I think that's
absolutely.
I think it worked very well.
Good. I'm glad, because that's what I want this to be enjoyable for everyone. I don't want people to tune in and just hear the same old stale, you're right, I'm wrong, I'm right, you're wrong. Like, because it gets old. It really does.
Right.
I think this is more important. But I forgot the most important question. Are those Rosetta Stones behind you?
Rosetta Stones?
Yeah. Rosetta Stone, the language learning software? Or
no.
Okay.
I have a lot of books behind me. If you're looking at this stuff over here, those are biblical commentaries. This whole shelf over here, gotta keep it on there. This shelf is pretty much all biblical commentaries and textbooks. The 3 shelves to my right are all other books.
Okay. I hope that answers
predominantly like science, philosophy, and theology.
Okay. Awesome. Well, Lucas, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. In closing, is there anything you wanted to say?
I just really encourage people to study. I mean,
right, absolutely.
I'm gonna go back, and this is just the nerd in me. I encourage people to read as much as possible.
Right.
And whether you struggle with reading or not, like, it's a hard thing to get used to reading regularly, but like, you really get down to engaging with the core of these questions when you start picking up books. And I mean, academic books are great. I just read a book that, one of the things I found, Kindle, there are a lot of really cool free open access like academic publications on philosophy, theology type stuff. Nice. So if you're interested in reading any of that, you can get some stuff for free. I downloaded like 7 or 8 physics books that way that are just academic publications. It's just a word of encouragement to those out there seeking the truth here. Really dig deep into whatever books you can find and don't give up. How Reason Can Lead to God by Josh Rasmussen is a really fun read. Yeah, so I could list books all day that I could recommend to people about science and faith.
No,
I'll recommend one more. I'll recommend one. I have it here. It's On Faith and Science. It's an excellent book. And here's the thing about this book. It's written by one of the authors is a guy by the name of Micheal Bruce. He is one of the he's a leading atheist philosopher of biology. And he co-authors this with a Christian historian of science. So it's a really good book, very non-biased, excellent history of science and faith, if you're really interested in that topic.
Awesome.
I'm just going to plug books, I guess. That was my fault.
That's totally fine. And so real quick, just on that topic, like, so I have been delving more into audiobooks because so here, let's just say I had some medical issues, and since recovering from said medical issues, my ADHD, it's like there's a bomb going off in my head all the time. So like, I'll pick up a book and I'll start reading it, and it's just like a non-stop noise in my head. Now, listening to audiobooks, no problem, but I'm trying to find a better way to naturally treat my ADHD, because it puts me at a huge disadvantage, in my opinion. I want to read everything. Like, I am obsessed with learning, but it can be a struggle if it's not in an audiobook format. So speaking of which, if anyone has any natural recommendations for better treating ADHD aside from weed, I'm open to it. To be clear, though, I am a proponent of medical marijuana. I am using that. I just haven't found a strain that gets my brain to just slow down and relax. But that's talk for another day. Lucas, thanks for coming on. I'm just going to take you off screen for a moment, and I'll be back with you in just a minute. Okay.
All right, cool.
All right. Everyone, thanks for tuning in. Any feedback is greatly appreciated. A like and subscription is also appreciated. And I do hope everyone has a good day. I hope you found this conversation informative. And if you are looking to debate or host a discussion, I'm bringing in as many people as possible. So, for instance, Puck, Kenneth Leonard, Cynthia McDonald, Richard Graves, I've all met them through doing this, and they're all finding other people to come on the show and talk with. So if you're interested, there's someone you want to debate, let me know. Reach out, email me, like and subscribe, and keep thinking skeptically. Have a good one.